Welcome to Coffee with Kish. Well, today I've got what I hope will be an interesting commentary on a recent episode of Mormonism Live. Now, let me say something about Mormonism Live. Mormonism Live is a show that's extremely friendly to a critical point of view, a negative point of view on Mormonism. That said, Mormonism Live is funny. The guys on the show, and sometimes Maven, who joins them, or other guests, they're usually, the hosts and the guests are really smart, funny people. And, Bill Reel, who was a former bishop, who was excommunicated, who was at one time very heavily involved in LDS apologetics. Then Radio Free Mormon, who's got to be one of the cleverest, most eloquent, and hilarious people on the podcast and YouTube scene who comments on Mormonism. A guy knows Mormonism and Mormon history pretty darn well, can make the kinds of hypotheses that really only quite informed LDS people can make, and he in the past had an entire series of recorded Sunday school lessons on the sort of deep dive into doctrine and history that very few people are able to do outside of like dedicated Mormon historians and some apologists out there. But I I remember one time I was talking to Radio Free Mormon on the phone, and I had this, what I thought was this great discovery about, LDS history, about Mormon history. And so I started explaining to him, and he's like, yeah, I know that, yeah. I thought, oh, wait, you mean you already thought of all of this? So, you're not going to get a whole lot past Radio Free Mormon, and you're probably not going to outdo him in gospel knowledge. Well, recently they had their 200th episode celebration, which was kind of a comedy episode where they brought on this special guest, Dewey, who's a very funny person, and the title of this is The Ridiculousness of Mormonism, laughing at the ridiculousness of Mormonism. Now, how do you feel about that? How do I feel about that? Well, on the one hand, it's a funny episode, for sure. It's, in my mind, it's kind of like watching those little South Park bits about Mormons, where, even if you are Mormon, you can kind of laugh at yourself in a lighthearted way. And I really think that there is that element to it, that some of this is good-natured. But I think below that surface, there's also some of the anger, frustration, hurt feelings, and biting commentary that's very, brutal to Mormonism and the LDS Church. Of course, I think that there's definitely a place for this for people at a certain place in their life. I still watch this stuff because I'm very much part of the, I would say very much part of the post-Mormon scene, but also I like to keep up on the Mormon studies scene, and I have lots of friends who are active LDS. But I'm going to kind of take a different tack here today and argue something that's contrary to what they were doing on this really funny, funny episode of Mormonism Live. And I'm not going to call this a Kish Critiques, because it's really not a critique of what they were doing. One could certainly do so, but I don't really honestly see the point, because I believe in free speech and I love comedy. Comedy is an important thing, but I've always been, I will have to admit, I've always been kind of irreverent. I could tell you some of my stories. Some of them aren't so flattering, but someday I'll tell you the things that I've said in the past to people that I thought were very funny that were probably also irreverent. I'm not really good at keeping a serious, sober demeanor. Let me put it that way. So what do I want to talk about? So, yeah, okay, laughing at the ridiculousness of Mormonism, that's one thing, right? But what I think is kind of cool about Mormonism is just how much interesting, weird, nerdy stuff there is there. And so it's got a real richness to it that it's, I don't know, sometimes I feel like it's being bleached away a little bit at a time, more and more, and I really hate that. I have to say, I don't like it when Mormonism, I think, becomes more sanitized and boring. But the stuff that is weird or interesting is sometimes stuff that, when people know about it, it's also not necessarily very flattering, particularly not helpful for missionary efforts. But there's a reason why one of the, most interesting ongoing podcasts right now is Angels and Seer Stones, because there's so much folkloric material in Mormonism. And I think that I would go so far as to say that Mormonism takes what's kind of a pared down Protestantism and injects it with a lot of interesting folkloric material and ritual material and heterodox doctrine. But that's what makes it so cool. I mean, of course, it leaves it open to ridicule, but by golly, I've spent so much time going down different rabbit holes in my search to understand what is going on with things like the Hill Cumorah, and where the golden plates of the Book of Mormon, where the gold plates were supposedly deposited by Moroni, the last prophet of the Book of Mormon. I mean, all this, where do you get this stuff, right? It's interesting. I mean, here we have the Bible, right? So people know the Bible inside out, right? And I think what happens over time is that something that's familiar is taken for granted. And the arguments get stale. Like right now in this country, I think our political arguments were getting stale between Republicans and Democrats. And then along comes this completely crazy QAnon stuff that's really actually quite frightening and dangerous, but it definitely changed the discussion, right? I don't think in a good way, but it changed the discussion. Well, I think in a way, Mormonism has changed, or did change, the stale discussion of Christianity and actually enliven it again and make it more interesting. And I think that's cool. One time I had the opportunity to be interviewed, so to speak, by Peggy Fletcher Stack of the Salt Lake Tribune for an article that she was doing on a friend of mine. I've only had like 3 chances in my life to be interviewed by a reporter for a newspaper article, and that was one of them. All 3 times, by the way, interestingly enough, had to do with Mormonism. So I think that says something, especially when, I'm a professor in a history discipline, and I've never been interviewed by any reporter about that. But Mormonism, yeah. Okay, 3 times I've been interviewed. All 3 times had to do with my participation in something to do with Mormonism. So maybe this is why I'm doing a Mormon YouTube channel and not a history YouTube channel. Although I do have plans in the future to do that too. Okay, so anyway, talking to Peggy Fletcher Stack. Can't believe that I'm talking to Peggy Fletcher Stack, because if you're in Utah, if you know anything about Mormonism, and you're in that scene, she's a very famous name, and she's an excellent reporter. And sometimes the things that she reports have been, hey, you. That's my little friend who always wants my attention. I call her my barnacle because she always wants my attention. I sometimes the things that she's written have made the leaders in Salt Lake not very happy with her. Well, okay, so she's writing an article on my friend, and she's just casually talking about Mormonism because the story is about my friend rejoining the LDS Church after having resigned, and she's just talking about Mormonism. She goes, I just like being part of a religion that has this really crazy, interesting narrative about, this boy prophet who finds gold plates and talks to angels and so forth. And I, sitting there, as an ex-LDS person, no longer affiliating with the church, I said, yeah, that is cool. That's true. I think that's true. Why not have an interesting story? And the mythos of Mormonism, if you want to call it that, and I'm not saying something about whether it happened or not, but the mythos is so rich, and we could spend forever talking about, for example, the gold plates. And apologists have written. I had an aunt who married a BYU librarian. She's passed away, and I don't even know whether he's still alive, but he wrote all about plates in antiquity, because he was kind of a Hugh Nibley type. He was a student particularly of ancient Greek and German, could speak German fluently, wrote a book that was published by Deseret, which is a really good book, by the way. Sometime I'll get into that. But he wrote an article about the use of plates in antiquity. And this has been one of the go-to apologetic arguments that, the Book of Mormon plates. How would Joseph Smith have known that there were ancient plates that were inscribed in antiquity? And, fair enough. That's a pretty curious and interesting thing. I just like the fact that it's there, and that you can put Joseph Smith's plates in the context of a much older tradition of epigraphy, of writing on durable objects, including, things like gold plates or bronze plates. To say, okay, could Joseph Smith have known about this? It is the case that if you go read like Dio Cassius, his history of the Roman Empire, basically just a history of Rome up to his day, he talks about a silver plate that was inscribed with the honors the Senate voted to Julius Caesar, that was placed at the feet of the statue of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill. So, inscribed silver plate. All right. So the writings of some of the writings of Augustus, an inscription of his achievements, his lifetime achievements, called the Res Gestae Divi Augusti, written on bronze plates and placed before his the mausoleum that he was buried on the northern campus Martius in Rome. Again, writing on a durable object, very famous. People know about this stuff. So, of course, it's not impossible that Joseph Smith could have known about these things, but still, it's interesting. And honestly, those aren't really excellent parallels for what we see in the Book of Mormon. I think there are actually other better parallels from antiquity, inscribed gold plates that were placed outside of, temples in Italy. Rolled scrolls of metal that were buried in ancient Israel, with lists of temple treasure, I think it was. I'm forgetting all of the details, but there are these ancient documents. But that's that's something that makes Mormonism groovy. And I think my favorite example would probably be the Emerald Tablet of Hermes the Thrice Great, that had all of this Hermetic doctrine written on it. Yeah, I mean, there I think we're getting much closer to the kind of thing that the gold plates would seem to be similar to this Emerald Tablet of Hermes the Thrice Great, who is, this fictional, ancient, esoteric great teacher, who sometimes identified with ancient prophets like Moses. There's a whole interesting esoteric dialogue, which means you should study a little bit more about Western esotericism if you've never heard about this. I think Mormonism does fit in the background of Western esotericism, but this is the stuff that I think makes Mormonism groovy, not really ridiculous. Things seem ridiculous to you if you are in an unfamiliar context. They seem funny to you. And that's natural. That's cool. But I think what bothers me is when it veers into the very mean-spirited laughing at. And I'm not accusing Mormonism Live of necessarily being mean-spirited like that. I think there are definitely times, and I just have to Pache Bill Reel here. I think there are times, especially when Bill Reel is kind of mean-spirited in his jabs at Mormonism, and that's his business. I'm not here to call him on the carpet for it, but that's what I hear sometimes when I listen to Mormonism Live, and I have to say I don't really care for it. There are times when I'll take a break from that show because of that kind of thing. That said, I remember there was a time when I felt that way, and that kind of humor was important to me. A long time ago, I used to listen to Infants on Thrones, and they were hilarious. And a lot of times, that was kind of pretty mean-spirited, even anti-Mormon or anti-Mormonism humor. But I don't. The problem with it is that that too easily then attaches to the people, and I think that Mormons or LDS people pay a price for the mean-spirited humor that's aimed at the religion and aimed at the LDS Church. I get that the LDS Church does things that are unpopular, and I agree that some of them are disagreeable enough if you have a certain mindset that you're probably not going to last long in the church. And that was me. After many years, I just came to the conclusion, look, I love Mormonism and its history, so much about it. I've gotten so much out of this, but there are certain things that the LDS Church is doing, particularly on the political front, that I just can't identify with anymore. And so, you set everything else aside about Mormonism, and how can I support an organization that I'm disagreeing with so much? Now, I'm not going to get into those details here because that's not what I do. I'm not trying to convince you that you should quit Mormonism or that you should quit the LDS Church or that you should do anything. I'm here to geek out about Mormonism, and I hope that that's what we're doing now. But I do feel kind of also, though, protective of Mormon people, of LDS people, because they're my friends, they're my family, they're some of my co-workers and students, and I've had lots of great conversations with my Mormon friends and family, and I don't like the idea of them paying for the ridicule that's aimed at the LDS Church and at Mormonism. This was just something that came to mind to me when I saw that episode of Mormonism Live. I started watching it, and I did find it funny. I thought a lot of the humor, at least to me, seemed good-natured. But, I honestly don't think, if you're LDS and you watch my channel, that you're going to like it. I don't really necessarily recommend it to you unless you have a thick skin and an irreverent sense of humor. I happen to, but I also happen to no longer affiliate with the LDS Church. So it's easy for me. I can stomach a lot of this stuff. And in the past, I've probably engaged in humor. Like, I will admit to have written humor pieces for that Salamander online publication a long time ago. What was it called again? I can't remember. Something Salamander or something. But I actually wrote a few articles for that because of my irreverent sense of humor, and I did so actually as an active member of the LDS Church. But I couldn't keep my sense of humor in check. I know that I'm not very funny here. Sorry about that. I'm more capable of being funny when the camera's not on me or I'm at a keyboard than I am when I'm staring at the lens of a camera. But so that's the dilemma that I have. Do I like humor? Do I even like cutting humor? Yes. Do I really want to send out into the world, or keep putting out into the world these jabs at the LDS Church and Mormonism? I guess I decided in my life I'd rather geek out about Mormonism in the other way, which to me is, as a student of history and as someone who spent a lot of time studying antiquity in particular, I'd rather look at how Mormonism fits in that context. And that's not because I'm arguing that Mormonism is ancient. I mean, I'm really not a Hugh Nibley type or a Daniel Peterson type either. But I do think that there's something to say that's very important about the groovy, interesting, sometimes quirky stuff where you're going, wow, it's interesting how Mormonism lines up in the sweep of Western culture. And it does. And I think it makes Christianity interesting again and lively again. And I sorry if that offends a lot of my Christian friends. I have got a lot of Christian friends whom I love and respect, and I'm also not arguing here that Mormonism isn't Christian. I think it is. It certainly isn't Trinitarian Christian, and I actually do, by the way, think that that's a sort of a philosophical and doctrinal problem. I'm definitely not of the mind that solves theological problems. I think it actually arguably raises theological problems. That said, I have a pretty universalistic point of view, and I think there's room for Mormonism, and I wish there were more room for Mormonism in the Christian world. I think thanks to people like Steve Pinnaker and Bridget Jack Jeffries, you have Christians out there who are showing, yeah, we can be Christian, we can be fair to Mormons, we can be nice to Mormons, we can learn about Mormons, we don't have to be Mormon, but we can have a rich, lively, and rewarding dialogue without being nasty. I like that. I actually do prefer it over the approach of other people I really love, like Sandra Tanner. I think she's a wonderful person. That said, I deeply disagree with her approach. I do recognize that and acknowledge and am grateful for the valuable things that she's done, but in the service of taking people out of the LDS Church, I'm not on board with that at all. In fact, I'm not on board with that here. And I've specifically made this forum not a forum for encouraging people to leave the LDS Church, which I think, a lot of post-Mormon or post-LDS, ex-LDS YouTube channels, frankly, they do. Some of my favorite ones, lots of people that I love. But I thought, well, there are lots of people doing it, and this is actually not where I want to be. So, laughing at ridiculousness? No. I'll leave that to others. I'm not going to hound them about it and try to make them feel bad for doing what they're doing. Geeking out about the grooviness of Mormonism, about seer stones, angels, gold plates, temples, endowment, ceremony, garments. I mean, all those things I think are cool. They are things that are ridiculed by other people. That's not what I'm going to do here. Anyway, we'll keep the conversation going. Tell me what you think. Please like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time. Coffee with Kish. Take care.